24%, right on the back of the COVID and the Black Sea Wars. And we took a number of measures to bring it down, mostly through inflation targeting by the central bank, and then also on the supply side, trying to drive down the drivers of inflation. This government is already beginning to signal that they are worried that inflation is going to go back up or be sticky, not come down like was programmed to come down. Remember that already the disinflation path says that we should be doing about 11% inflation by the end of this year, if we were using the path or the direction that the MPP was traveling on. And from all indication, there are worries that we may not be able to even sustain that 11% inflation average for this year. In fact, properly speaking, this government should be going down, I dare say, somewhere to about 7%. Because if you look at the disinflation path on the MPP program, which was bringing us to 11%, and their argument that they were going to do better, they should be doing 9, 8, or 7%. We did about 7.9% in the early years before COVID hit us. And they can do it if they focus on the interventions on the supply side. It is because they are not focusing on interventions on the supply side and putting money and efficiency behind those interventions that the central bank has to use its inflation targeting module and hike up the rates, which comes to punish all of us. So they have opportunity to do the right thing.
And as a stopgap measure, you will then not object to the 14.75% price rise in electricity tariffs as a way of plugging some of the fiscal slippages.
It's very interesting you ask that question, because when you read the IMF statement goes on to make the point that they are happy that the government has introduced the 14% tariff hike, and that they think that it is important to avoid what they call further fiscal slippages moving on. That is indication that part of what they are countering as our fiscal slippages, part of the, may I say, the assessment where they mark us down was that we didn't increase electricity bills enough. And so they are happy that this government has increased it by 14% because they believe that it will avoid fiscal slippages. We disagree with the IMF on that one. And when we're in power, we disagreed with them. We'll continue to disagree with them. As a government, you have to ask yourself a question: how much of these electricity bills can be passed on to the consumer at the end? If you sign a contract on the back end that is a capacity charge, which capacity charge has not been consumed by the consumer at home, it will be unconscionable for you to pass on the bill to the consumer at home. The PURC will not allow you to pass it on to the consumer at home. The PURC will say, well, it is you, the government, that signed a capacity charge for a take or pay clause with this producer. And so if that power has not been produced, you, the government, have to bear that. And the government can find ways by which it can ring fence and find other ways of paying for it, not necessarily through the budget. But what this government has elected to do is to pass it on to the consumer, 14% increase. Today I was listening to feedback from some consumers who say that, so if you took away 1% here and 10% on people who have earned from bettings, not everybody participates in it, only to slap 14% on what everybody consumes, even for what they have not consumed. Are people better off or are people worse off? So it is a choice that the government has made, and they will live or die by that sort. What we will keep recommending to the government is to tone down on the political rhetoric and focus rather on substantive work, and in particular, reduce expenditure, be more efficient in utilizing the available resources now, in investing in productive sectors so that you can generate a lot more growth and jobs. Encourage the private sector to come in, offer incentives to the private sector to come in so that the private sector can use its resources to do more of what government is using. I'll give you two final examples. Today, the government is refusing to renew the lease of multinational mining companies. A step that sends a very bad signal, if you put it together with many of the things the government has done in the gold industry, a very bad signal to the investor community. And so the private capital, and the last time, for example, that Goldfields invested in their Damang mine, it was about $1.7 billion. Private capital that you require like this to invest in the Ghanaian economy. The government is sending a signal that your investment is not fiscally or operationally safe in Ghana. And at the same time, the government is now taxing Ghanaians or borrowing money to give about $279 million to the gold board to go buy gold. At first, that $279 million is foreign exchange earnings that will come from, people who want to import gold into their countries, Indians, Turkish, Arabians, etc. Now the government priority has shifted from allowing them to bring their money to buy gold and take it out to using taxpayers' money to buy gold. And instead, where they were bringing their money to invest in mines, the government is introducing measures that discourage them from bringing their money into mining. So what we're saying to the government is that stop the propaganda, focus on the job, admit the economic progress, and rather introduce policies that will build on it and enhance. We inherited a debt of about $2.4 billion on the energy sector side. We introduced a number of measures that ensured, so this was a debt of $2.4 billion at a time when power was not stable. We introduced a number of measures that cost us about $6 billion to keep the lights on in 8 years. And at the time that we were leaving power, we had a debt of about $2.4 billion. $2.4 billion, mostly occasioned by the redundant capacity charges that the NDC themselves had signed up to. Now, we also believe that a lot more efficiency. So, my point on that is that the NDC cannot sustain the argument that we did not manage the energy sector well. You walk on the streets and anybody, on the street will tell you that if it comes to managing the energy sector well, the NPP is done way better. In fact, this morning I was reading tweets from the Volta region and people complaining about Dumso in the Volta region. You've heard Dumso being complained about in the Ashanti region, etc. So on the assumption of office of the NDC, already people are beginning to complain about their inability to properly manage the energy sector. We will not be against private sector participation. No, we'll be interested in seeing the model for private sector participation that they bring in, because it would be unconscionable on our part, having tried private sector participation before, to come back and say we don't support private sector participation. That would be duplicitous. So we will be interested in seeing the model for private sector participation they want to bring, and the transparency and the gains that will come with it. And then we can take a definite position on whether or not we support a particular transaction that they'll put on the table. But I think as a political group, we have already demonstrated that we think private sector participation can bring efficiency in the energy sector.
Sir Radiadum Kwanya Honeho. Yes, nay, Adaji ni Prosokra, a Welisa Hotel Cramantemu, and yet by Uncommon Frio.
That's it. Millions of Kaya and Cray. So they can a Kaya, every general community. About why I got to 2024, and I'm so a moment intro. And I'm so at tea. And Professor Michael Quay Committee, so we film. Call a my Ghana hanging Nanya Namswa. No, it in Chonum, 1 far and number 2 acre. No, and no continue imaginary and neck. But I can say almost a day a year reports on air. I bet you and 24. Yes, and the president no meetings, no, I hold 1 million. Yedi kind neck meetings, a very kind acquisition. And no, as I said, there's a anopa, there's a lundi. Omo ewie no afena a national council meeting and so about the president. They know me ya na enomo about present a report no ama a national council meeting no na eno so about the attraction. But no kasai afena eno about the person. Na Ghana man permit that kanana do dango so about the pimu ha. Ade di actually and sabi pimu ha. The born chidom na to also our hase. Dr. Machibuku Pempe. And 24 the one Manalti Roda. And between 24 the one of Cabia, a woman else about the Kiwa. Yomo Elfe, the Numian, the naturally, Yomo Eddie, a national council meeting as a source. Nansambia, Nasomabu, ne party ne form the pastor ye nam so na mo ebi ntro no this so busa me a me try ka say eye empelifo no anabi be na be ko no meeting na ne mo e baba ye meeting no session ye di kan national executive meeting I am next no mo di kan wi am no ka say no you no pepe na fi national council meeting no so akọsọ achese no so we are and we dem twan boys and for amane ne report you see na you say it any be no shabo ati for money na no ka say there bitra ka say telephone no do no ba de pinu e wa ha ka dem man peni wona de dey extreme na dey born extreme in na ba de pinu ha but before the do no mo ka dey no aba de pinu e wa
Brana ma wi sese sesi ano se de man pani akufu ai man pani da akufu ado ne bawumia ene omo bobom di na pomo nyina no yenhwe akitaafo no so aside se edom no party ni man bebrebe aba ho anase sai ne nema sistie e wo ho
but no ka sai pepe ade no party for no bedo no a na ni padodo a na hu wo ha ye un se ibidum ho ha na enko bi afọ mu guru boy sada me de from wo mo no e be so kwa FCC no mo mo samrane na mo ye mo de ko ma abari bedo ha mo party for no akasa de se bi a party supporters a bi bi a wa party atade ni ade no de do no ami hu to do ha sei memo very prakaze guru boys no ana se mrantie no a ebire bia no tempelefo no kwa no mo sa wo no o de do na ba de pie mo ha sei a wo mo enso e wa ha
Kwame adwuma wa ya che ya reporting ne awrade a odomo a ene Kesman 92.9 kamantemu ya pejwa mo ya se mufo hoyi se ya tronso ha behu ya se ene wa ya kefo ohoma pipesi ni bia liki o bibi ne ya se liki okọ ho no se de yesi nya ne ntie se report ni bia liki ho ga ba ya ho se mebrebe enei wodu asoto to fem no wo titi de ni betimi afiri mu aba nkasa
winya no kwe para okeka kana abia tripla bonte report no ebia liki no ba ha no pa die betimi akasa you know yanti se example telephone si bu no telephone a wo eka bia ewu ni tuna kasa wo ekiti bi ade na mbom breaking summit media man ni say Dr. Tukuku Pempe wono ne bo Dr. Mawa Dawmia Chidom woni ya di akikere komo na nkomo no wo kase anayibusa ne say wetin na information say 2028 anhwe ono so ebe so ba tutu franka no ebi abako play ebi o si ade dia no ko bi anim onye na dwen kwa se obebi hisa ntamonfo a nam ya ne ade nyina no obo ntumi na ono de ebire bia no party be to afre no se ebia Tatabawumia ana ebia mpo yes atu abama no ananse moto abama no muyi no so muyi no so ebo ti dem obeko na emu onye na de so no so e kwa kutina se ankankwe ananse no so apre se franka no bitu franka ama empty amanyuko no enti anu so di nkomo a ye ba ye ne mabia Developmental take ba na mo abo na manfat the report mu sendel no kasa de let na kasa the sa entumi na ka akpabia de wa apie Alisa hotel dada no nam ko mu ano awati bi no eno ano da so nam ko minimum Alisa ha de nya say bia report mu bi say asi na say bi say akoso
medu wiye kura no Kwame usa na nsan mu ene omo kasa de man pipia mnyekuo no no omo kasa de bo yewura Bawumia Chidom no ene bebrebe no asa atene wo ho a omo kasa se ene woye one candidate de ma NPP last elections ni mu enti omugidi ye se ene akompra ko Japan ene opai ne fans no wosoro pa fi na Ghana for me ka yenim ko yenua aboa papo wakasa nsem bi na ukoye Kennedy akompra ko Japan ene enipa hodu awo ye so twetwe omuti omo so aba ho
no kasa de so ade omo emara izan say next meeting no before was a baby national chairperson past president vice president past and then omo a candidate ni na omo baby past chief of staff meeting baby national vice chairman second vice chairman third and general secretary deputy general secretary omo baby national treasurer baby and a minority leader national organizer deputy and national organizer so baby national chairman council of elders or no so everybody national women organize everybody and the benefit be do omo na empa ewe mi cinema na omo ti aba enti onabo pere da complex da for dem no kasa ni na ehu no e wa ha say nemum na fe abla papo no na teacher afo ni dem na hu ebia wa but you say e ba e say everybody dem no omo ya na kinti na de no so e ka ho bia ya na obedi enti me no kasa de enyo mawo eno na 2 o'clock council national council meeting no na me 2 o'clock nje bia afena omo e ba say na bank of for the plan no oba ye enche
na say no me na dwumade ne bekọ so ne mampane eri kiaba one na gbe akiri na so mo nyina no nipa dodo ya na kamehwe ne mu kwaso bebai aye ni so beba na so mo ma so ma amade a na so mbeti Africans ben he ya se ene makoko ekire se de nkofo bi kekeka no do 2 franc ade ma wo mo na wa amwa na be de akire so amwa nti sei enti sa na ombeti Afri o yesa
enti no na report from the Baba national council meeting report so no more present amomo na fi omo ahwe meeting no say bia ye ko ye senior say ye no no me binum so say do ko an ko na Japan so no dem say binum so bonus wo say about me so lose no so ka ho bi tan say bi o kan ye no eno anenam so ama say amanfo bi anambisi 43 ya omo e de etia e mpema me ko na ne de ba no amanfo di so na me ka say guru boys bi ade no omo so kika bi sa e wa aso ya report no say bisa ewum enti me gidi say or so ba be piemu e wa ase na say report no wa se no e from the faso no ni nyina mu no omo insan say nyam say obi a report no wa se ewu bia no o say oba na afei de no e kasa da panya obi ti ma faso 2028 obi ti ma kon bo chimi agi eye akonya no
Ame kamija mu akona we so ba be bom ye hwa de we se se de omusi ka no se de agyaye ho tete bia na yesu